Hi, this is Robert Clinkenbeard with the Commercial Landscaper Podcast. Really excited to spend the next 30 minutes with you and really find out what ways in which we can improve your business. If you go away with 1-2 improvements to your business on a weekly basis, that makes significant progress over the year. We really hope you enjoy the shows. I encourage you to like and share with your friends, your network, your family members. Based on my book, The Ironman Mindset for Entrepreneurs, I want to pull out some type of content, some type of nugget every single week, meeting a guest, and that helps you develop your business and become more profitable. So check out the Wilson360 website, look at some of the coaching programs, look at some of the training courses, click on those links, figure out how can we help you. We have now 14 people in the team that can come and help your business. So cheers everyone, have an awesome day. Hi, this is Robert Clinkenbeard with the Commercial Landscaper Podcast. Really excited today to be joined by Sean Eddy. Sean, welcome to the show today.
Yes, thanks for having me, Robert. I appreciate you fitting this in.
So for our audience, tell us a little bit about you, about Sean, and your background in the industry.
Yeah, so Robert, my entry into the industry was with Aspire a few years back, end of 2022, getting those years mixed up, but was with Aspire for a couple of years. I've been in sales for the last decade plus. I've worked in various industries, whether it's software, products, things like that. And, it was always focused on, making as much money as I could. And to this day, that's important to me, but not until I joined the team at Aspire where, I really started feeling an attachment to the product solution in the industry to which we served, where we actually seen a tangible effect and positively on businesses and the industry as a whole. So after my time with Aspire, I had a couple of relationships. I worked with a guy in Long Island landscaping company and helped him really get the most out of Aspire. Since I was the one that brought it to his company, he reached out and said, "Hey, can you help me get this thing going?" So we did that for a little under a year. Really got the system implemented and utilized there, and then I joined over here with Top Green, and that was through Corey Beidler and Brian Moore's connections from Aspire. And when they showed me the product, it was something. These are conversations that we had quite frequently. While I was with Aspire, is how granular do we want to get to be able to understand where the opportunities for improvement really exist? And my gut initially told me what Top Green is doing is going to get those insights and be able to really focus on becoming lean in the landscape industry.
So let's dive into that a little bit more. Just to explain that, just in terms of what the product is, and then we can dive into that a little bit further.
Yeah. So when we look at the industry as a whole, through my time at Aspire and now these first 10 months here with Top Green, we see that there's a lot of variation between a few key metrics across the industry. And there's been consulting firms in the industry that have helped create Gantt charts and plan out the maintenance component of the industry's elite, right? So how do we know how long things should take us, outside of a bid, how long it's actually taking us? In the past, without sending I've talked to companies that have sent out, undercover agents, right? And they go look and see how is this site being performed, right? And there was a story that had happened and one of the crew guys had noticed that somebody was sitting over there and might have recognized them and kind of popped up to hey, what's going on, So, from that, some companies will have a guy go, string trim, a line, they mark out, certain linear feet, and then they try to come up with a production factor, right? There's a lot of variables and subjectivity to some of these things, but there's also the objective side where it's math. So what we want to do is we want to take, distance, we want to take the crew makeup, the equipment available, the work that needs to be done on a site. And in our minds, it's very mathematical. So, with the technology that's out there these days and through the usage of smart vests, we can capture actual site performance and compare it to what we have planned.
I suppose when I start thinking about it, a lot of the production rates, benchmarking, I suppose even that gut feeling has been around for years, and that may have influenced how whatever system you're using was built, or when you're building times for jobs. And I don't think a great deal has changed, even though technology has probably improved in terms of types of machinery. There's a lot of advancement there. Reliability has probably improved as well. So I like where you're going with the whole, producing some real data which you can make decisions.
Yeah. And we talked about it the other day, right? With the company you exited with, you had some things in place, right, to understand, kind of what your production rate should be, and an idea of a plan, a flow chart. And a lot of companies do that, right? But it's not. We talk to one company, maybe it's a requirement that is met half the time. Other companies, it's not required. Some account managers will create a flow map, or for the crews. When we talk about continuous improvement, a lot of that comes down to having a standard to be benchmarked at. And that's not necessarily always going to be, there's in different areas of the country, the size of the organization, there's some factors that go into it. But for the most part, if I'm going to grab a string trimmer, an edge, or a 60-inch mower and go mow, there should be a standard expectation in terms of, how many square feet I can cover, or what linear feet I can cover with those pieces of equipment. And within the organization, now we can benchmark our teams, right? So we know the high performers with Top Green and the Smart Vest. We know kind of where we can leverage our top performers, because they exist. And this isn't a knock on any crew members or anything like that, but there's some that outperform others. I mean, we see it across sports. There's the elite of the elite, right? And then there's the guys that have great careers. They hit average, and in baseball or whatever the case may be. And there's others that are not. And it's just a fact of life. And it's not against anybody in particular. But we think through data analytics, and we've seen it with sabermetrics in baseball, right? And they're using a lot of advanced analytics to where we believe we can elevate, right, certain folks by giving them insights into what they may be doing wrong, which they don't know now, right?
I suppose there's a couple of things I think about. We'll take the first part. You've got the resource allocation. My mind quickly goes to machinery. I always remember that, back at my day in ILM, every truck, every crew wanted their own ride-on mower.
Yeah.
So suddenly every truck going out, the yard had a mower on it. So, obviously more capital purchases, probably more fuel being used to and from the job because of the heavier weight. But when we actually dove down into that scenario, we found that machines were only being used for 2 or 3 hours in the day. We were able to sort of maybe rethink that allocation piece, and suddenly we were, for the next couple of years, we didn't need to buy any more ride-on mowers. So that's just one example, but I'm assuming from your vests, that's one of the examples you can look at in terms of really truly identifying where each of the pieces of equipment is being used.
It's very true. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a part of this, right? Is understanding how long is this equipment being, if I have a crew that's going out and they have a property that requires, it's a larger property where they can get 260s on it, but, they're hitting 5 or 6 other properties where they can't use those 60s, right? We probably want to know that. Maybe we can route a little bit better and understand, where those 60s are going to be used. Well, let's let's make sure all the properties that crew is going to can use those.
Right.
It's not a main focus. I think it's a piece of the larger picture that we're trying to capture, right? Is if I know the square footage, the linear feet, all the things that need to be done on the site, and I know how many crew members that I'm going to have and the equipment that was bid, right? Because that's another component of this is, we bid a job site, with 72s for the larger turf areas, the open areas, but there's not a 72 available, right, within the organization to complete that. Maybe there's not even a 60. Maybe the crew that gets assigned to, it's a 50. They have 52s because most of their properties, that's what they use. Sometimes, if that gets overlooked and it gets performed for 6 months, 8 months, and you're like, man, these hours, just what happened here, right? Did we bid it wrong? And it's so common. Like, was it bid incorrectly, or is it just being performed poorly? Well, maybe it was bid correctly with certain equipment, but that equipment's not available, and the guys are performing it very well. But a 52 is not going to cover the same that 72 is.
How about in terms of just the manpower, the flow around the job site? I've obviously many times caught my guys. They maybe they park the truck in the wrong place, and they're conveniently using where the truck's parked to just take a break and walk back and forward.
Yeah.
for anything they've forgotten. Just that flow around sites must be a piece in which you can identify pretty quickly on the inefficiency of how they manage a site, especially I think like a large HOA, for example. That takes a lot of careful planning. To talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, so that goes, on both sides, the planning piece and the intelligence with the smart vest, right? So when we plan this out, there's a lot of other solutions out there that companies are using to identify areas that need to be serviced, right? And what our goal is to take that to the next step. So we know where the string trimming needs to happen. We know where the mowing is happening. We know where the bed spaces are, right? But the next piece to that, the next layer in our eyes is, well, who's going to do that, right? So we have 4 guys. What's the best way to split that work up that needs to be required between those 4 people so that they're all utilized for the time being on site? Because sometimes what we'll see happen is if, the turf area is so large and we only have 160, well, that guy is the only person that can mow, right? But everything else is getting done. And then we may have 3 guys waiting for one to get done with the mowing because they only had 160. So we take all of those things into account when we plan it, right? So what is the production factor while we're producing this service, and then what is the transition time, right, expected from me going from this area of hard trimming to this area, right? So that's a transition, and we consider that dead walking because there's no production really happening, but we need to capture that time. And again, there should be a standard on that. To your point, now with the Intel and the Smart Vest, if we know that for string trimming with the walking and everything, right? I have a couple screen grabs, but if we know that we have 4 hours to get that done with the dead walking, and we're getting it done in 5.5, and we look at it and the production looks good, but we see a lot of movement up and down the roads, where there's not service happening. And we know there's some additional transit time that we can identify and see kind of, what took place here. Was it, to your point, going back to the truck to take a break and then walking, 15 minutes back to where you stopped your trimming originally?
Put you on the spot here. I mean, do you have a screen that you could share? Is that something you could?
Yeah, I have a few things I put together that we can go over. The stuff's a little redacted on it, right? Just to make sure that, everything is kosher, but we can talk through kind of what we're seeing and what we think it means and what the conversation is like with these, existing.
Yeah. And obviously apologies for people who are not able to see it on the screen, but we obviously post these as well on YouTube as well, but you could check things out there. Sean, maybe just talk through it and bear in mind that people are probably maybe not in front of their screens when you're seeing it, so maybe help address both people.
Will do. All right. So I appreciate you. Let me share this, Robert. So if we look at this here, this is a plan within the Top Green Planning Solution, Crew Planner. So what we see across the top of the screen here is what is expected to happen on this site in terms of the crew time, total crew hours, the dead walking that I mentioned, right? So this is that transition time between one service area to the next. And then what is the production ratio of the crew on this site? So this is taking into account, we have four crew members out here. The Gantt isn't showing the Gantt's down here in the timeline, but what it'll show is, these guys are all finishing the work pretty close to one another. And that's how we got our production ratio so high here. So that's a key, metric. And with the crew planner, you're able to kind of sandbox it, right? And see, here's the timeline with one piece of equipment per service. And then if we add, a string trimmer, how does that split the work between 2 or 3 guys, right? If we want to add 2 string trimmers, how do we balance this so that everybody's really going to wrap up their work at the same time and there shouldn't be any downtime?
Just a quick question on this. The dead walking is that transition time combined amongst all the crew members, and that's an actual figure?
Exactly. Yeah. So if you see down here at the bottom under the equipment, we have the equipment being used. So 52-inch mower, we're saying 57,500 square feet per hour should be covered here with a 52-inch mower. Okay. Right? The transition pace is 7 miles per hour. So that's what's capturing the dead walking. So we're saying taking a mower from one turf area to the next, you're traveling at about 7 miles per hour on average. With a blower, right, we know they're walking, so their speed is 3 miles per hour. So going from one blowing area to the next, that transition time's going to be X based off of the speed of walking on the ground. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that would be a good way, if you were to try and improve the productivity on this, the ideal is to try and reduce that time and up the productivity rate.
Yeah. So when we're doing this, we're we released the version, and we've had some updates over the last few months on the solutions. I think where we're going with this, we don't want to overburden the crews with like a direct path of motion where they have to look at it and they follow it to a T, right? I think maybe down the road, as we start to see how this evolves, that could come into play. But to start out, we want to give them the service areas that they need to complete. We think that the crews understand, okay, if I'm going to mow all of this turf area. So what we see here, looking at this, and I haven't described it, is, crew member 1 is green, right? So 52-inch mower, he's capturing this top quadrant. Crew member 2 is 52-inch mower, he's capturing this bottom quadrant, right? So the way that's split, crew member 1 has 5 hours and 25 minutes. Crew member 2 has 5 hours and 25 minutes. So it's split. So they should be wrapping up the same, with the mowing. In addition, you got crew member 3 and 4 who's going to handle the string trim, the edge, and most of the blowing to get off the site. And it's hard to see here, but we can. It's just I had to do it this way to kind of cross out some.
No, this is definitely helpful. So
yeah. So we've captured. We know how many people, right? Within this, we know how many pieces of equipment. We got two mowers, we got a blower, an edger. So we know the people, the equipment, and what we've promised to the client is sitting here, right? So, for instance, this property, through our conversations, it may be, 4 guys for 3 days, right? In peak season. So, that's, and that's written, written in the contract. So with that being the case, for 10-hour days, that's 40 hours times the required to be there 3 days. We got 120 hours that are really promised to the site, within the agreement, right? That could be the case. Here, what we're saying is, and this is half of this property, so there's another piece over here, which will be on the next slide. But for this portion here, to get this done day 1, it's 5 hours and 41 minutes of crew time on site, right? So a crew of 4 would be here for 5 hours, 41 minutes, 22 hours, 47 total crew hours. Okay. If we look at the next slide, go ahead.
Just a quick question. How is it being received by the crews, when they're being told, hey, you need to wear this vest, and suddenly there's questions about Big Brother, do they play the system? How can I get around this? All those things probably pop into their head.
Yeah. So, we're working with a lot of great companies right now that, to be honest, the initial conversation didn't really center. When I came on board, because of my time at Aspire, when we were trying to get crew to clock in with, their phones, right? There was pushback. So, that was obviously a concern, or, something that I thought was going to be a bigger sticking point. Initially, we haven't running into it as being a sticking point when through the process of onboarding. But what we are starting to realize is to your point, there are some challenges. Whether it be, in the office on the charging and making sure, that everything is ready to go by the next day. And, right. And the other side of that is the crews are grabbing the vest in the morning, bringing it out to the site. So there's actually, it's funny. I was just talking about this yesterday. There's a wide range of challenges. It's almost like not one challenge is the same across all of our current client base, right? One is having charging issues, one is having wearing issues, right? Where it's kind of fluctuating. And what that, obviously what that does is when we start talking about the intel piece, if I'm under the assumption that there's only 3 guys here, but there's really a 4th, he just didn't have his vest, right? And they were there for 6 hours. I'm saying, okay, we had 18 hours on site, but in reality, we had 24, right? But, outside of that, I mean, when we've captured the data that we've needed to capture, we're seeing tremendous upside and opportunity to improve site operations. Because a lot of times, and correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, when you bid the work, right? So you're using production factors and you're doing these things and you give it to the crew and they go out and they get it done. Do they typically come close to the hours? I mean,
it always seems to work out that they seem to match pretty close to the hours or grow over.
Yeah.
Because they're either playing the system, they're sitting in the trucks. Yeah, maybe there's obviously some really good estimating versus the work being done, but it always seems to be pretty close.
Yeah. And I might have framed that question not great, but you said it, right? So if they have 10 hours for 4 guys, they're going to use those 10 hours for 4. Sure. Typically is what we've been seeing. If they can't get it done in the 10 hours and they have to go back, they're going to go back. But, we have seen instances where, maybe we got done in 7.5, 8 hours, 8.5 hours, right? Well, then what do we do in those situations, right? Who knows that they were done in that time? And is that going up the chain the right way? And this isn't, again, we don't want to put this in the focus of Big Brother and just capture, idle time. We know that that's a component of the value that we provide. But the biggest improvement on these sites is the movement and the separation of services in a way that you see it here how it segments north and south, right? So there shouldn't be any crossover. On some of the intel we're getting back, we'll see crossover, right? And sometimes it's a good amount, mowing of the same areas. Maybe one in the morning and the other in the afternoon by another guy. So that's where we see the most of it. But to your point, we do see there's areas where we can improve getting these guys off site. So what we're looking at here is this is day 2. It's 2 hours and 23 minutes, right? So this is the same property. It's just one half and the second half. So if we look at 2 hours, 23 minutes and 5 hours, that's 8 hours of site time for 4 guys. And this property should be serviced from mow, trim, blow, and edge. And what we're seeing here, if we go down, this is the actual crew intel data that's coming back, right? So this is the one half of the site. And the reason why I wanted to share this one here is because it confirms what we're saying, right? So if we look at the two guys that had mowed on this side of the road here, this site, I can see it's 6 hours and 41 minutes for crew member 1 and 4 hours and 14 minutes for crew member 2, right? So that's about 10 hours. What is that? 10 hours, 56 minutes or so of mowing on this side of the road. And if we go back and we look at our plan and we add up the mowing, we got 10 hours, 51 plus 28 minutes of that dead walking, that in between time. So that's 11 hours and 19 minutes, right? So we're off by 20 minutes. And that's our production rate in the plan and the actual on the site. So we've been able to verify and say, okay, our production rate that either the client's providing or that we're using as an industry standard is pretty close. So if that's the case, we want to make sure we're following it to a T.
How do you then take the next step? How involved do you get in terms of either, pulling back the hours, managing your talent? Obviously, this is all around talent. And how do you either make them more efficient? Is it more training, more development, employee development? Does that then lead into paying higher for your higher productivity employees, and maybe to attract more or better talent? So all those conversations must be had, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's different by company. So we've been having over the last couple of weeks additional conversations around the additional efficiency obtained here, because what we're seeing is we should be able to improve the margin on existing sites and increase capacity to take on more work with existing staff. We've been having conversations around incentivizing, the following of plans. Obviously we can't, we can make suggestions and get the ball rolling or, the thoughts going a little bit. But it's on, the company to actually make that call. One area, that we could talk about, right, is a property like this here. The conversation around this was, there's 4 guys on this site. The crew leader, is asking for a 5th. The office might be thinking that, well, I don't know. I think we could maybe just, keep 3, right? Maybe we should take a guy off of the site. So we can see that the majority of the site is covered here. 90%, I think you'd agree to that, right?
Yeah.
So if we're looking at this and we look at the actual property summary here, right, we can see the top 3, produced, they got there. So what we're looking at is the orange is travel to and from the site. Purple is going to be 0 ground speed, right? So no movement with the vest, the smart vest, and green is the production. So when you're looking at this, very quickly, we can identify, that bottom 79805, was idle a little bit in the morning, but worked until the end of the day. Right, till 5 o'clock. And then we see, a few others, where they did have production early in the day, right, from 11 to about 12:30, 1 o'clock. But then maybe there wasn't anything else for them to do on this site, right? So what then happens? This here, now the conversation goes around, okay, we can confirm that this site can be done with less people according to the data from one day, right? So it's important to have multiple days of data. Maybe we're missing something here on this day, but in order to confirm it, we need to see this happening in real time regularly. But just from looking at this, at least now we can have a conversation and say, okay, what's going on here? Right. We have, I don't know, hour and a half to 3.5, 4 hours of idle time or so.
Yeah. I'm just looking at that from the chart here. If people can't see it, I mean, there's 3 people out of the 4-man crew that are, generally idle between 1:30 until just shy of 3 o'clock. So, is that an extra long lunch break? But it sort of gives you data to to allow you to dive a little bit deeper.
Exactly. Yeah. So what you see, usually that orange in the middle there is going to be the lunch or dinner at this point. This is 3:00. You got a little bit of orange up there. I think, that was maybe, I don't know, gas run or something. So it's giving this data. So this is where we're at today. I don't have any screen grabs of where we see this going right now. So we're in the midst of creating KPI dashboards that will give this information in a way that as an account manager, production manager, somebody in the branch manager, you look at it, it's like a stoplight, red, yellow, green. So you can very quickly identify the areas that you need to focus on. Because let's face it, these guys are busy, whether they're in the office, in the field, we understand that. So it needs to be something to pinpoint what to look at first. Highest priority. Those spaghetti dashboards, like what we see, like the path and movement and all that's going to be more back end, right? Not front end, right. Where when you actually need to dive in, now you can go see kind of what's happening. But from the front aspect, we want to give you kind of metrics around finances, efficiency, and quality, right? So if we know that there's 600,000 square feet of turf, and based on the vest coverage, you covered 500,000 square feet of turf, what percentage of turf was actually covered on that property? So you can identify properties. If you get a call from property manager and they say, hey, I don't know what's going on, but it's not full service, right? Whatever the case may be, you're going to know that. You're going to be able to go in and look at the property and see like, well, we've been covering about 500,000 square feet of turf and they got 6. I guess we should have expected this call, right?
Where do you see this going? There's a lot of data here. My mind springs to talking about hiring talent that, are more and more companies need to start thinking about having almost like a data analyst or specialist. You've got all this data coming in from, products like yours, others like, Spire, Boss. You've got people are still using the GPS systems. There's probably other ones out there, but all this data coming in and it's somehow interpreting that and then putting it into different applications. It definitely could be overwhelming. Mm-hmm. But, if there's certain elements you could dive deeper into, then, over time, the small incremental improvements, you could make significant improvements, profitability, efficiency, all the above.
Yeah. So, the component to this is, and through our conversations, some of the challenges are there's so many solutions now, right? Because the industry lagged for a long time. And then you started to see, the Bosses and the Aspires, LMNs and business management, and then obviously the fleet management with GPS. There's so many different avenues. And I think we've seen some of them start to kind of, there's a lot of APIs and things like that. And I'm not going to speak to like, is this happening right away or, where it is, but those are thoughts that we've had. The data is great, but data without a clear map on what the data means and what the next step is. Again, these guys, a lot of times they're running multiple parts of the business and they have a lot of focus areas, right? So if they have to take data, analyze it, try and figure out who to talk to get something done to fix it, it's not going to work.
Right.
So I think that the roadmap for us obviously includes AI, right? So prompting, hey, what's going on this property? Well, we see, and this is, chatting with AI about a property based off of the analytics and data that we're getting back, right? So we can very quickly diagnose, where the challenge is. It's obviously not going to tell you why, right? It'll tell you maybe the ground speed's a little bit slower than everybody else. It might tell you that there's a lot of travel back to the truck, right? Because we're going to know. But you can chat with it and see, like, how do I improve it? These are the suggestions, right? From similar scenarios, companies, would have a 3-man crew on this with these types of equipment. Maybe there's a big open, there's an open area of 2 acres. Have you thought about autonomous? So AI will be a component of that, and it's generative AI, right? So as you're doing things and you're building the profile around how your company's performing, right, it's going to be able to give you the best. And this is more coming from me, but the system should know human capital that you have as an organization that are crew members. We also know the equipment, right, that you're going to have available to your crew members. And we know all of the properties that you have, right, that need to be serviced. So with those 3 things, we should be able to understand capacity for people, equipment based on what you have, and provide insights. And I mentioned this to you the other day. It's crazy to think, but provide an insight of, if you take on another 100,000 acres, you're going to need 2 guys, right? Based off of what you have available today. You're going to need to think about, a 60-inch or 72-inch mower purchase, right? Whatever the case may be. But these are the things that, it's going to be able to help identify.
Yeah, and that's cool, especially when it comes to budgeting season and people are projecting, hey, what's my growth for next year? What does it look like? What's the manpower? What's the capital purchases I need to make? So having that available data to help that decision making is super cool. Hey, Sean, I know we're wrapping up with time here. What's the best way for sort of people to reach out to you just to learn more about the product, about your company?
Yeah, so you can find information on Top Green to kind of go through and do some initial research for yourselves at topgreen.ai. In addition, LinkedIn, we have a YouTube where we have some videos coming up shortly. I mean, you're going to be able to find us at the Wilson360 event. We'll be at Elevate, sponsor for you guys, and then we'll be at Elevate and the Lawn and Landscape Tech Conference. So we're really getting out, making the presence known. We're seeing a lot of good information and data. I mean, I haven't felt this passionate about, work or something, work for a very long time. When you start to see little snippets of what this could mean, and you're right there. We're really pushing through. Obviously, this is something new to the industry. We're going to have some benchmark reports and some things that we're doing with lawn and landscape. You'll be able to see some of that info. And what I would say as well is, over the next couple months, probably early July, we're gonna run a proof of value campaign. Very shortly, we'll have a landing page and some information coming out, of how to become a part of that. I think there will be a post in a couple of the industry magazines, publications as well. We'll take a short snippet and prove the value that we know exists on these sites.
Well, Sean, I really appreciate your time today. I'm excited to see you at our conference here at the end of July, and you being able to share your thoughts with some of the attendees there, but appreciate your support and thanks for your sharing today. I'm excited to see what the future looks like with your product.
For sure, Robert, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's glad we can finally connect, and I look forward to get out there to Denver. I got a friend out there. I've been meaning to come visit. So
awesome. Well, nice time of year to visit.
For sure.
Cool. Okay.
Thanks, Robert.
Okay, cheers. Bye-bye. Hopefully that was pure dead brilliant for you today. We've got some great Ironman mindset takeaways for your business and for your leadership role. This is Robert Clinkenbeard, the Commercial Landscaper Podcast. Check us out on all the different podcast channels. Check us out on YouTube. Like, share. Also check out our website, thecommerciallandscaper.com or Wilson360.com. Check out some of the digital courses. Check out the book, The Ironman Mindset for Entrepreneurs. We want to make sure we have a pure, dead, brilliant day. Cheers, everyone.